Thank you all again for being willing to join us today to talk about legislative advocacy. We're grateful to have these representatives from our denomination who have been doing these visits and can share some of their wisdom with us. So I was wondering if you could start by introducing yourselves, a little about the work that you do, and why do you think that we as disciples are engaging in these types of visits?
Sure. Hello, everyone. I'm Reverend Dr. Sharon Stanley-Rea. I work as Disciples, Refugee, and Immigration Ministries Director, a Ministry of Disciples Home Missions. And I am very excited that we, as a full collective partnership of multiple justice-oriented ministries within the Disciples denomination, we have been working together throughout the summer to help this really be experienced as a summer of justice. So we are inviting individuals and congregations and regions now to join together in a culmination of our summer of justice by partnering together in holding advocacy visits. And our visits are a culmination of that summer of justice. They also, we hope, are a new way that we can build and strengthen the muscle for doing advocacy, for speaking our faith values in ways that hopefully will produce more justice and systems change around our country and throughout the globe.
This is Peter Makari, and I serve as executive for the Middle East and Europe in Global Ministries, Division of Overseas Ministries, with the Christian Church Disciples of Christ and United Church of Christ. My main responsibilities are for our partner relationships in the Middle East and Europe, as well as supervision of the mission co-workers that we have appointed to serve with partners in the region at their invitation, as well as participating in the education of our churches here about the main issues of the region that our partners are facing there, and engaging in advocacy around what our partners are calling for us to do. And so we, as a Christian church in the United States and Canada, base our engagement in the world on the scriptural texts and the examples that we read there that Christ lays out for us. And those are also informed by the connections that we have globally, the connections that link us to Christians and people all over the world. And we hear from them, we hear their perspectives that inform the way that we go about our work here. And we realize that the policies of the governments that we participate in have impact globally. And so as part of our Christian faith, we engage in advocacy, lifting up those voices from partners around the world.
This is Ken Brooker Langston, and I am the Executive Director of the Disciples Center for Public Witness and the Director of Disciples Justice Action Network, DJAN. Disciples are involved in public policy advocacy, really all kinds of advocacy, because disciples have an identity where it says a church, in order to be authentic, in order to be wholesome and growing, needs to have three things: deep Christian spirituality, true community, and a passion for justice. So what we as disciples try to do, those of us who are involved in various forms of advocacy, we try to take those things. We try to be in deep Christian spirituality as our grounding, and then take this vision of true community and this passion of justice and take it into the public sphere. And there, through a variety of means, protests, vigils, all kinds of things in the public, taking it to the public policy makers, because somebody's going to make public policy. We might as well be involved. And that's the reason we do what we do.
Legislative visits are really especially about building relationships. In many ways, building those relationships and strengthening our partnerships starts before you go into a visit, and it continues as you are in that visit, often because honestly, staff members continue to change again and again. Mm-hmm. But it continues as we know that part of what we can do as communities of faith is really live and move into the Hebraic tradition of what it means to be apocalyptic. And that means we are there to help shine a light, to bring new information. Hopefully, as I have seen too, some of the best legislative visits, as others have mentioned, are those where we are in the visit together with individuals who are most directly affected by the policies. I think back to a year ago when Joanne Bell Haynes, as one of our amazing regional ministers with the Christian Church Disciples of Christ, was willing to step into national legislative visits, something that was a bit newer to her. But she did that as a part of a team together with dozens of others from around the country, but visiting her local leaders nationally in partnership with refugees who brought their voices, their personal experience to bear, so that she was able then to support and stand in critical partnership and solidarity with those refugees who were most effective. And indeed, their visit had a real change of heart for their Congressperson Buck, and he ended up helping to co-author the refugee support legislation that encouraged others in his political party to jump on. And I also think it's important, as we're making visits, to think about visiting those who might be most critical potential influencers on legislation. So if we're working on refugee-related legislation, sometimes that's members of Judiciary Committee. When we're talking about COVID support, that may well be related to those who play key roles around appropriations. And often we forget to really do that research about our own leaders and find out what are the key roles that they play, because that helps us strategically think about how to hopefully affirm something that they have done in the past, which helps us in our relationship building, but also nurture them towards whatever the asks are that we're carrying into that particular meeting, and encourages them to use their power in ways that we as faith communities might be able to support and appreciate.
That's helpful to think about doing your research about the member you'll be visiting with, finding out their backgrounds or connections to the issue. What other logistics do you consider when planning these visits, especially now that some of these need to be virtual visits?
Yeah, virtual has changed some things. We're still trying to figure that out. I don't know about the rest of you, but we are. Things like time zones, you wouldn't think about before. Now you have to think about that. You have to tell people about that. Prepping, you have to do that in a different way than you are accustomed to doing it when you all get together as a group and sit down at a table in the Senate, building before you go have a visit. I can think of lots of things that you start having to think about different platforms. A lot of staffers, they may offer the platform, or they might go on your platform. You got to figure that kind of logistic out. Some of the things are the same, like getting on the call 5 or 10 minutes ahead of time, making sure you play your part, not going over the time that you've been allotted. I think that the stories that were mentioned are key. They are key, because I've been in so many meetings where those of us who are the advocates talked and they kind of listened, and then the people told their stories and they were mesmerized. You can't contradict somebody's experience and their story. You can contradict their list of facts or their list of statistics or whatever that is. So that's key. One more thing I'd say key that continues from the time before and the time we're in now, except you might have to do it a little differently now, is always be gracious and thankful and respectful and as generous a spirit as you can have, even as you're urging for a particular ask, because that's the relationship building that Sharon was talking about.
Yeah, I would agree with what has been said already. And in my experience so far, I haven't had an opportunity to have a a visual meeting. In other words, not through Zoom or Skype or something like that. The advocacy meetings, actually many of them that I've been involved in these last few months, have all been on the congressional secure conference call line. So it's really a challenge to read body language, to know who's eager to speak and who's waiting to say something. In these cases, you know, we may have 3 or 4 or more of us in the meeting, and we need to make sure that we know who's going to say what and in what order, because we can't just look at them and, you know, turn it over to them. It's also hard to keep track of who's in the room from the representatives staff because you can't see them. And you don't have an opportunity even to have any, you know, just a short chat with them at the very beginning to get to know them in a few sentences. So all of that is challenging. I would say that yes, it is easier to be able to bring multiple voices in, but it's also really important to make sure that you identify yourselves as constituents, or you identify who the constituent is in the group that's meeting, because they want to know that there is somebody in their district who actually can vote for them or not. That's really important. And in a virtual meeting, when people are calling in from all over the country or even the world, it's really important for them to know that maybe a vote is at stake here. And so, you know, that electoral calculus plays into it as well. And there's a greater willingness to receive an invitation to meet if a constituent is involved. And the opportunity to follow up is just as important. So at an end of a meeting, you know, in this relationship building, make sure to offer to continue to be engaged and write an email and follow up and say, you know, I'm prepared to share more information. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to be in touch. But make sure that the end of the call isn't the end of the discussion, and that you can continue to engage.
We also should maybe just remind folks too, it's always helpful to the office as well as helpful in demonstrating that some in the meeting, or hopefully most in the meeting, are constituents, if we send the listing of both individual names, where they live, if they have particular leadership roles in organizations or in our congregations, that we know staff always seem to find that helpful. Mm-hmm. And it can also be helpful if communities of faith work to build relationships both in the local offices and with the national offices. When that happens, there's less of a potential that one office might try to refer you to the other, and in that way sort of get rid of your concern. But you have, you know, we multiply our power when we build relationships both with national and with local offices.
Just a follow-up, many of you mentioned talking about roles before going into a visit. I wonder if you could say a little bit more about what that looks like and any other tips and tricks for what works well when planning these visits.
Well, Sharon can correct me and back me up on some of this, I suppose, but one of the things I think is, you know, we already said it, need to say it again, is prepping. You know, it's just so important. You need a note taker, somebody who's going to take the notes to be able to, so that afterwards, when you have your follow-up meeting with yourself and your group, you can talk about what happened. You know, people's memories kind of differ, and so that they can talk about what happened, how they feel about it, possible next steps, you know, that kind of thing. So a note taker is very important. You got to make sure people don't talk too much. They've got to stay to their allotted time. That's very important. Usually 20 minutes. If you got 20 minutes, you're lucky. That's the top. So if you've got to ask, you should probably do about the ask at least 3 times. maybe at the end of the story where they say, so I hope that you 2-3 stories short really is all you need. And then at the end, you just want to promise them to get them whatever they need. You ask them if they need anything. They might just tell you, can you get me the numbers on that? Can you get me the dollar figures on that? So you got to do it. You say you'll do it. You promise to get back to them. You do it within, I guess, 3 days at the most. You don't hear from them probably in a week or a week and a half. You get back to them again. But as I said, you make sure you get them all the information, all the people who were there, who they were, and just anything else they wanted. If you have a letter to deliver or whatever, signatures, you give it to them. You promise to follow up on that. If they ask about that, you promise to do something else. They say, well, can you do X and Y to augment this? And you thank them over and over again for the time that they are spending with you, for taking this time, for being with you. And then you continue to thank them as you follow up. And you share information with the people who were the advocates who were there. That's very important too, so they know what's going on. You keep talking to them afterwards. They don't want to just go in and then disappear. You don't want them to either.
In terms of roles, one strategy may be to have one person take the lead in describing the ask, describing the reason for the visit and the particular perspective that the group brings. Another person may have a personal experience that they want to share, telling a story. A third person may have a particular specialty in understanding and suggesting ways that the language of the piece of legislation itself could be adjusted or changed. So, getting into the specifics, and you want to have somebody, if you're talking about a piece of legislation, you want to be familiar with it, and you want to be able to discuss points of that, because that's what they are using as a basis for the conversation. So the other thing is, it's remarkable how often staffers or representatives will tell groups that I've been in, we really need to hear the voices you bring because we don't hear them as often as we need to. We always hear from the other side. So it's really key. They may be sympathetic, but they are perhaps acting based on what they're hearing from waves of groups who are coming in with one perspective, but really aren't hearing another side of it. And sometimes we are that other side and need to be able to articulate it well. And they are often eager and happy to hear our perspective and are receptive to that. And even to the extent that they're thankful that we bring a particular faith perspective into the conversation, because many of them are people of faith, and they want to hold on to that.
You never want to go in, especially not knowing the position of the legislator you're visiting that is in some way related to the ask that you are making. You should be deeply aware of some of the quotes, the previous positions that they have taken, the legislation they're supporting. If you're asking them to sign on to a piece of legislation, make sure you know if they've already done it or not. You don't want to be embarrassed by finding that out in the midst of being present in the interview. And it's always a good idea, we found, and it tends to be a question that brings out some surprises sometimes. If you ask in your meeting before you're leaving, what are you hearing from communities of faith? Because often that question says, we're not hearing much, and it would really make a difference if we did. Or, you know what, we've heard a lot from the Catholics, but not from the Protestants, or a lot from the Christians, but not from another faith. And all of that is deeply informing, that can help you then, after we leave the meeting, think about how do we build the best strategy going forward with that leader to continue to hopefully increase their support for our point of view.
Yeah. A trick that I was going to mention of the trade or whatever is, as she was saying, do your research. And so two things off of that. One is, if they've done something you like, make sure you say, well, we like that, and show a lot of appreciation. The second thing is about doing your research is, if you go in, do a specific ask as you can, to vote yes or no on a particular bill, to sign on as a co-sponsor, to think about something, whatever it is, the most specific ask you can make, that you feel comfortable making in this situation.
Yeah, and I can't emphasize enough what's been said in terms of staying on message. An opportunity is in front of you, and you may have a whole list of things that you want to talk about, but it's really important to stay on message because that's really what's going to stick with them.
So another thing we have to do is we have to figure out who in our ecumenical and interfaith partnerships already has relationships with people. I mean, because again, if they've got the relationships, let them take the lead, and we'll bring our people, if it's necessary or helpful, to the table, to the prep, to the meetings. And I think this is especially the case in Canada right now, because we're not all well versed on Canada or Canadian politics. We have some people there doing things, and our partnership with the United Church of Canada is going to be very helpful. But there are groups there that we partner with that are on the ground, like Kairos Canada, and the public justice group that's there. And that's how we learn. And we don't go there ourselves, but we pull some disciples in from there too. They take the lead. So we have to be ready to find out who knows what and let them take the lead many times.
And I was just going to say that in terms of preparation for a meeting, a particular disciple may be very enthusiastic about a particular issue, but may feel that they want to get more information about it. And so the national staff, whether based in Washington or in Indianapolis or in Cleveland in Global Ministries or wherever, a number of issue and area experts are available. So connecting with the denominational staff who are engaged in these issues can be helpful, and we all are eager and willing and ready to help out as we can.
And I really would encourage faith partners, as you are doing legislative visits, as we are doing legislative visits, to remember, be not discouraged. You'll have a visit that feels really positive, and then you might have that be followed with one that just feels like you're in such a different place from a leader. And that is often the case, and it's not your fault. As long as you have prepared well for a visit, we can't make them agree with the perspective, but we can be confident, and we can maintain our confidence and our commitment to keep having visits even after one that might not have felt particularly comfortable, as long as you know and trust that you are living into your own faith values, and that you are expressing where God's voice, through the power of the Spirit and your discernment of Scripture, has led you to speak in that meeting. And don't stop speaking. The prophets gratefully didn't stop. Neither were they affirmed in every interchange they had. And so I have felt uplifted by the times when the prophets have felt their failure as well as their successes. And those are important moments to encourage one another. And those are another reason why it's helpful to make visits when you're able to in groups, because you are not just building a relationship with the legislator, you're building your relationships with one another, and hopefully building ones that continue to bring your voice of value to speak publicly to elected officials.